Boone County 911.
Yes, ma'am. I'm calling from Thermo Fisher Scientific, and I just walked in her office, and I think somebody had killed somebody upstairs in her office.
Okay. What makes you think somebody killed somebody?
She's laying there on the ground, covered up, and there's blood all over up the floor in the office.
Okay. Is it somebody that worked there, or?
Yes, ma'am.
Warning: some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Michelle Whalen was born in August 1969 in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky. Michelle was described as a caring individual. She would always brighten up any room she stepped into. She had an effect where she can make everyone around her laugh and smile. She was always a positive spirit. Michelle worked as a logistics support representative for Thermo Fisher Scientific in Florence, Kentucky. Michelle had been working at the company for about 16 years and met her husband Dan Mockbee there. Dan was a shipping supervisor. Dan and Michelle hit it off during a Christmas party Thermo Fisher were having. Shortly after that party, Michelle and Dan would start dating and would get married in 2001. They would also go on to have two daughters, Madelyn and Carli, who were 7 and 10 years old. On Tuesday, May 29, 2012, Michelle woke up at 5:30 to prepare for work. She wanted to head to work early so she could finish the payroll she had left over from the previous week. 7:20 a.m., less than 2 hours since Michelle woke up and started her day, Boone County Dispatch would receive a 911 call from a worker at Thermo Fisher.
Boone County 911.
Yes, ma'am. I'm calling from Thermo Fisher Scientific, and I just walked in her office, and I think somebody upstairs in her office.
Okay. What makes you think somebody?
She's laying there on the ground, covered up, and there's blood all over up the floor in the office.
Okay. Is it somebody that worked there, or?
Yes, ma'am. It looks like her name is Michelle Mockbee.
On-duty detectives would be dispatched to the scene to investigate. When detectives arrived and entered the building, they were greeted by a hallway with several doors. The rooms were offices for Thermo Fisher employees. Detectives could also see blood spots on the rug in the hallway. Looking at Michelle's office door, detectives could see pry marks, and Michelle's key was still in the door as if she was unlocking it before being attacked. When Michelle was found, she was lying facing down with her wrists taped together. She also had a large plastic bag over her head. Detectives also noted she was missing her shoes as well. Michelle's husband Dan was informed by some work colleagues that his wife had been harmed, and officers had the building on a lockdown.
County Dispatch.
Hi, my name's Dan Mockbee. I'm a supervisor with Thermo Fisher Scientific, and my employees are calling. They're saying they can't get into the building.
I cannot disclose anything to you right now. I can tell you that there's an investigation going on right there.
Can you tell me everybody's all right?
I cannot tell you that.
My wife works there.
Detectives had to interview 13 employees that were on site. Investigators asked each employee for a shoe imprint and DNA samples, plus their fingerprints. Detectives started their first interview with Ed. Ed was the operation manager on site for that specific day. He was also the person to find Michelle's body and call 911. Ed told detectives that when he exited the elevator, he was walking towards his office and he spotted the blood stain on the carpet. As he followed the stains, he found Michelle in the restroom. Ed said he started to freak out and panic, so he left the room and called 911 right away.
When I came up here this morning, that blood was not there. Then I walked toward the mezzanine. Once I got closer to the mezzanine steps, and then I could see her feet laying there with no shoes on. They had something wrapped around her, and her hands were behind her back. They started screaming and crying. I don't need to see this. I didn't need to see this.
When looking over the scene, detectives noticed a trail of blood from her office door all the way to the restroom down the hall. Seemed like whoever did this dragged Michelle through the hallway, trying to hide her body before other employees arrived. Michelle's purse was also found, and inside her purse were timestamps. The timestamps had blood on them, meaning someone placed them inside the purse after the crime was committed. Thermo Fisher building was equipped with surveillance cameras outside, but they didn't have any inside the building. On the outside of the building, one camera was facing the main entrance. That road was a one-way in and a one-way out. The second angle was from the back of Thermo Fisher's building, and it was also a one-way in and one-way out road. It was noted that the vehicle Michelle would drive was a black Kia. Around 5:50, Michelle's car was spotted on surveillance entering the parking lot. Switching the camera angle to the back of the building, there were two workers near a wooded area. Detectives thought that was strange, but when they investigated why the workers were near the wooded area, they were told any workers that wanted to smoke would have to go in that area. Since Thermo Fisher dealt with chemicals, no one could smoke on their property, so they had a designated area for smoking. Speaking to another colleague, detectives found out this wasn't the first time someone had tried to break into Michelle's office. Detectives would go on to interview a worker named Dooley. David worked as a janitor at Thermo Fisher. He would clean all the offices and the restrooms in the building. He told detectives that he arrived to work that morning. He did most of the offices, and before he knew anything, he was being interviewed because a worker had been harmed. Detectives also interviewed another co-worker who said he saw Michelle that morning when she entered the building. They said hi to each other before Michelle clocked in and headed to her office.
When you get here, what was the first thing you did?
I was waiting on the time clock to change to the clock.
She was at the time clock?
Yeah, she was collecting the time slips from the temporary employees last week.
Did she say anything to you?
I apologize that my coffee was sitting on the time clock.
Everyone the detectives interviewed told them they arrived at work, and once they checked in, they never left the building. They also learned about a white van that was in the parking lot that didn't belong to any workers. Before looking into the white van, detectives wanted to speak with Dan, the husband. Detectives started by asking Dan why was Michelle at work and he wasn't. Dan would go on to explain how Michelle took care of payroll. She sometimes would go to work early to take care of the payroll from the previous week. He also told detectives how they went out on a dinner date the night before. When they got home, Dan went to bed on the couch and his wife slept upstairs in the bed. He told the detectives he would sleep on the couch since he was on vacation. He didn't want to interrupt his wife sleeping if he was to stay up late. Dan agreed to do a polygraph test to prove he wasn't lying. After passing the polygraph test, the detectives would rule Dan out as a suspect. Now their attention would turn to the white van everyone was concerned about. Once detectives found out who owned the vehicle, they brought the driver and passenger in for questioning.
As soon as I turned off a 25 onto Empire, it started sputtering, so I started looking for a lot I could get into. And as I turned into Thermo Fisher there, the lot ran downhill and my van died, so I just let it coast down into the lot into a parking spot. No, I had Cindy and my 9-year-old daughter with me.
So what did you do after the van broke down?
We walked on over to my sister's.
Not necessarily there when things happen, but is there anything that you noticed?
The lot was empty, completely empty.
Detective felt like they were being honest. The driver and his family were at the wrong place at the wrong time. Investigators continued to study the surveillance from Thermo Fisher. At 6:31 a.m., detectives would spot a red pickup truck leaving the business. The truck would be spotted again, returning 35 minutes later. Detectives wanted to know when the red truck first arrived at Thermo Fisher. Looking further back on the surveillance, the red Chevrolet would be spotted for the first time arriving at 4:42 a.m. The truck would be the first to come on site that morning. Detectives realized that the truck belonged to David Dooley. When they spoke to David, he told detectives he had never left, but on camera he was spotted leaving Thermo Fisher's property. They considered this a red flag since they have evidence contradicting what David told them. Investigators headed to David's home, and when they arrived, detectives knocked on David's door. His wife answered the door, and the investigators asked if they could speak to both of them, but they would like to talk to them separately. David was told their conversation would be recorded, and then detectives begun questioning him again.
After the back hallway, did you go anywhere else in the building?
No.
Where did you go after that?
I put my stuff away, I emptied my cart, and I came back here. And then I went back to Fisher.
What time did you come back here?
6:30. I couldn't get hold of my wife, and I didn't want to make sure she was okay.
What time did you get back to work?
A couple minutes after 7, because they just went on break. He said, Ed's looking for you. There's a big mess upstairs or something. He said he needs you up there.
Detectives would go on to ask David's wife, Janet, a few questions. They started by asking her whether she had seen her husband David leave for work that morning, and she answered no. She told the detectives she was asleep when he left for work. Detectives asked her when was the first time she saw David that day, and she replied that he came home that morning between 6:30 and 7 in the morning.
When he left for work. When was the first time you saw Dave after he left for work?
Was the first time I seen him?
Yeah, yesterday after he came home after he finally gets
Detectives didn't believe David and his wife's story, so they brought them down to headquarters.
I called her again, and at that point I said,
maybe I'll just go home and make sure she's up, make sure she's okay.
When you got there, where was she?
Kissed her and made sure she was okay,
And then what do you do?
and went back to Fisher.
Do you remember what time you got back there?
Just a couple minutes after 7.
While this interview with David took place, another detective interviewed his wife, Janet. Janet started to change her story from what she first told them. It was so inconsistent that the detective considered David their primary suspect and knew his wife was trying to help him cover it up.
And then Dave come in the door.
What time did he come in?
Right at the text. I think it's 6:20 or something.
Now you need to think really hard about this because earlier today, you told the detective that you didn't see Dave until he called you.
Has he ever been physical with you before?
No. I said no, but he did hit me once.
He did to you?
He hit me. Yeah, he hit me in the face once. This one's his.
He just slapped you in the face.
The autopsy revealed Michelle had sustained a fatal blow to her head. The weapon was a tape gun. Detectives asked Thermo Fisher for a tape gun they used in their facility. When comparing the tape gun to the marks on Michelle's head, they were identical. The detective investigated David and Janet's timesheet of when they checked into work and checked their text messages from that day. When they compared the two, detectives found out Janet was clocking into work while also being home at the same time. The detectives would find out David was clocking himself into work and clocking his wife into work at the same time. David was charging the company 3 times the amount, basically stealing from the company. Detectives were able to paint a picture of what happened that tragic morning. Michelle came to work early that day. She entered the building, walked over to the check-in box, and grabbed the timesheets out of the box. After, she proceeded to head to her office. As she walked to her office, she came across David trying to pry her door open. David wasn't expecting Michelle to come to work early that day, and when Michelle caught him, he punched her, knocking Michelle out. She fell over and hit her head, causing her to bleed, which is why there was blood on the carpet in the hallway. Afterward, David dragged Michelle through the hallway to the restroom, where he attacked her more, hitting her with the tape gun, then taping her hand together and putting the bag over her head. David tried to hide her body, but he was in a rush since Thermo Fisher employees were arriving around the same time, and he needed to clean the blood from the hallway, which he failed to do. Detective interviewed David one last time to see if he would tell them the truth. They confronted him with the tape gun, and this was his response.
I want an attorney. That's it. This is over. I want an attorney because I want an attorney.
In October 2014, after a 3-week trial, David was convicted of Michelle's murder and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole.